Welcome to Young and Adulting, a podcast of the young adults community at Christ Fellowship Church. Our hope is to create a safe place for authentic conversation around the ins and outs of life as we all try to navigate following Jesus in the world we live in today. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the conversation.
Welcome to the podcast world. We are back, Young and Adulting podcast, and we are in season 8. Season 8, count it. If you've missed our previous seasons, you can go back and watch. We've been talking around some cultural issues and fun subjects that happen in culture. And today, going to be talking about maybe who you should vote for. You should vote for, well, we'll see where this goes. So we're talking about Jesus and politics. It is 2024. Election year. Is like I feel like is the word of most people. They're like, can I just skip to December and end up in it? But excited. We got Carissa, Alec, Lewis, and we're jumping into the conversation. Really, it's less about who you should vote for and more like how, as followers of Jesus, should we conduct ourselves. So this political season always divides. People get passionate. And when people get passionate, some things come out that should probably be better kept inside of our mouths and in our minds. And so, let's talk about it. Politics, Jesus, where do they fit? How do we conduct ourselves? How do we live with passion?
That's it.
And
it's difficult, Jesus? I think, to live with passion and follow Jesus because of cancel culture. Wants to always say, if you don't agree with me, you're done. And Pastor Todd said it a couple weeks ago, but cancel culture has kind of changed a little bit. It used to be, if you don't agree with me, we're done. But now it's if you don't advocate for whatever I'm advocating, then now you're the enemy. And so it just makes conversations and friendships and, man, any type of, you say politics, and oh my goodness, people get all upset and afraid. But cancel culture makes it difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And we talked about this, on Season Ocho a couple episodes back. Love Season Ocho.
You love calling it Season Ocho.
I really do. Yeah, it's been fantastic.
You need to learn 8 in another language.
Well, I started Duolingo last night. Just kidding.
You made it super far.
I learned one word. But we did an episode on cancel culture a couple episodes back, and we talked about this idea of like losing the subtle art of just having conversations. Yeah. Whenever we got a glass screen put in front of our face, it was just easy to make a fake account, and you could say whatever you wanted to say, and you could almost hide behind your screen and air out all your grievances and not have to deal with the whiplash or the ripple effect of what you've just said. And sadly, it's just permeated our culture to no one's actually having sit-down conversations anymore of like, hey, let's just talk about these issues like we did, I don't know, in the 1900s, and let's just have conversations and let's talk like normal people and actually see the human besides like the human on the other side of the conversation. It's not about issues. Like I love what Pastor Todd says, like these aren't issues, like these are people that we need to be concerned about and actually have some really good, thoughtful conversations on how are these political issues impacting the world that we live in and impacting people.
It's great.
I think it's great. I think it's interesting that you guys brought up the word passion.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we use that word as an excuse for poor behavior, right? Like, I'm just so passionate about it. That's why I'm so loud or vocal or tweeting these, ridiculous posts that are drawing hard lines and families and friendships. And I just don't think passion is a good enough excuse to be disrespectful or dishonoring or absolutely ridiculous on social media. Passion is just not an excuse for it. And I mean, I'm passionate about a lot of things, right? Like I'm actually not passionate at all about sports, not even in the slightest, but I know some people are passionate about sports. And if you're passionate about sports, it's like, it's fun, it's life-giving, good things come out of a great passion, right? And I think it's so interesting that you can be so passionate about a specific topic or issue in regards to this conversation. But I would just wonder, like, is your passion producing fruit or is it drawing more lines and breaking more relationships? Because it's just not a good excuse for being ridiculous. You can be passionate, but it should be fruitful, right?
Yeah, I'm all in. Like, let's get passionate about football. Yeah. Let's get passionate about tacos. Let's get passionate about season number ocho. But whenever we talk about politics, I think about this, man. The only hill that I want to die on is the hill that Jesus died on. That was Calvary. So the only stance Jesus took was the stance of the outstretched arms. The only stance Only place Jesus died was Calvary. So whenever we get in these arguments, people are like, I'm going to die on this hill. No, I don't want to die on that hill. Jesus died on Calvary. I'm good. And so I want to keep that relationship real long. And then one of the things that causes that, I think, is this confusion between what's political and what's biblical, right?
Yep.
What's political could be like taxes and the debt ceiling and different opinions and views that people have on like very just how to run our country issues. But then there's also biblical stuff that the Bible is very clear about.
Yep.
Pastor Todd said that the church is not getting political. Politics are starting to get into biblical issues. And so that's why we have to say some things that we have to say. And so that's, whenever we talk about passion, like what's biblical, what's political, what are the hills I actually want to die on?
Yeah.
And it's not about a political hill at all.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting you bring up, like, I don't even know the appropriate term for it, something about ceilings.
Yeah.
What was it?
Debt ceiling.
Debt ceiling.
Yeah.
Season 8.
I'm obviously not super passionate about that area, but you're bringing up all these terms that I feel like people in our generation are speaking to. Like, gosh, I just, as if they could run a country. It's
Right.
like, I think it's so interesting that we speak so out of turn about things that we have absolutely zero knowledge on. Like, other than your Twitter feed, you really would have no exposure or no experience to whatever it's called, ceilings. What is it?
Debt ceiling.
Debt ceilings. It's just like, I would never try to intervene on a conversation or die on a hill that I would have no concept or any idea, or any reason to speak to something that like I just have no idea about. And I just don't know why in this area we all of a sudden feel like experts in things we have zero experience in.
Yeah, that's great.
That's really good. Yeah, it's really good. And probably half the people are in debt and they're like, but the debt ceiling.
Yeah. Show me your debt before you start talking about your
That's
debt.
crazy.
That's fine.
You were talking about the only hill you want to die on. I'm like, bro, if you want to die on a hill, you got to leave Florida because there are none.
That's
my first thought was like,
True.
Yeah. But I think you're right. And I think in our day and age where anyone, anywhere can have a platform and say anything about anything, it only takes like a little bit of knowledge to be like, I'm the guy for it. Like the world needs me, and I think on one hand, it's incredible. You've seen a lot of incredible things happen out of people who, God's downloaded something or have given some passion to fight injustice. But I think when it comes to like political things or whatever have it, it just takes like someone who thinks they're an expert. They have like enough knowledge to get by, and most people who follow it don't know the extent of how deep or far that knowledge is. Just I heard someone say like the danger of even being a pastor and preaching is like you're only 15 minutes ahead of everyone who listens to you. And I'm like, oh, I could see how it's true. Like I've done 15 more minutes of research around this subject than you have, and I look like an expert, and we're not. So I think it's great. I think you're talking about hills to die on, and really I think it's a question. Specifically, we're with young adults who maybe have never voted before.
Yep.
Maybe their parents don't value voting. They're like, this could be the first time they're coming of age to vote. Don't know what to think about it. I think more than that, the question is like, come the end of November, who are you going to be? And what relationships are you still going to have?
Absolutely. Because
like you carry yourself appropriately in the next 6 months. Like we're like 3 seconds away from stupid all the time.
Yep.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Like how do we prioritize who we're becoming, but at the same time saying like, hey, these are things we should talk about. And this is a biblical framework for maybe engaging in some of these questions. Anybody want to jump on that?
Yeah. Well, Jesus, when I look at him, like Jesus associated and Jesus liked people that were nothing like him. And people nothing like him liked him. Like Jesus was able to be in relationship with people that completely disagreed.
It's great.
Definitely wouldn't have voted any way he would have voted if that was a thing. But man, if we can be people like Jesus, and the way he did that was he just served people.
Yep.
Like, what if in this season we didn't look at how to win an argument or make a point, but just how can I serve you? Like, the difference between when you're about to get into an argument, and like you said, when you're about to have a conversation with somebody. An argument, you put on the boxing gloves. A conversation, you sit at the table.
Yep.
And so if I could be like Jesus and just serve somebody, have a conversation, that'll do more for me than any other political argument I could get in.
That's great.
Yeah, I also think too, like we're not going to change everyone's minds. I think off the cuff, like I don't think I'm going to change really anyone's minds this election season, but I can determine like my posture. I can determine my heart. I can determine my values. I can determine how I lead my family and I lead my home. And I know that we're just going to do it in a gracious, humble way, because here's the truth. Someone is getting elected this election season. But the relationships that I have, they're still going to be there, and they're my responsibility. And I can either let this election season rip those relationships apart, or I can actually just love people like Lewis was saying, and lead my home, lead my family in such a way that we're just going to honor people. And at the end of the day, if we have the opportunity to tell people about Jesus or tell people about politics, I want to tell them about Jesus.
Right.
Like if the relationship, if we differ on politics, I'm not going to make that an issue. I'm going to keep the relationship so that I can actually introduce them to Jesus. And I think, again, just like taking a step back and like at the end of the day, like who's the most important in this election season? It's him. Like who's the one that's actually running everything? It's him. Like we have a responsibility to introduce people to him, not necessarily switch them to our sides on political views this election season.
It's great.
I think it's so good, because I do think that's the trap that some people fall into, is trying to convince people of what you believe, right? Like we want to convince people to believe what we believe, but and maybe that's, you know, that it's okay, you know, if that's something you're going, gosh, I have a biblical conviction around this idea, I want other people to believe what I believe, that I just have never had anybody change their mind by yelling at them. Like I've never convinced somebody of my opinion by being rude or disrespectful or making them like me less or by hurting their feelings or whatever you have it. Like I've never convinced somebody to change their mind because I've been rude to them, right? I've only ever convinced someone to think maybe differently by the way I've served them or loved them or modeled my life in a way that's attractive to go, gosh, maybe she's onto something, you know, the fruit of her life would go, oh, maybe there is something there. Maybe she does have a valuable opinion because of the way she loves me and cares about me, you know? So I would just say, if you're trying to convince someone, just make sure that you're attractive enough to be convincing. But also I think it's so important. You mentioned going home and just like being with your family and going, gosh, what's your priority here? Like, is your goal to get on social media and convince the world of what you believe? Maybe you will. I mean, I know some people are influencers, but the majority of us are going to go home and we're going to hang out with our family, the 5 people closest to us, and we're going to live with those people. And those are the people that like the rest of our life forever will be surrounded by. And if we ruin those relationships, man, that's just not the goal. We've got to maintain and love people really well.
I love that.
Yeah, I feel like you could make a difference by sending a tweet or making a post, or we're Christians. We have conversations with God who sits in heaven and intervenes on our behalf in human affairs. There's 2 ways to make a difference here. I could post about it or I could pray about it.
So good.
And man, what would happen if we just decided whoever gets elected, we're going to pray for them?
As we should.
And then even after the election, whoever loses, they're still a human that God loves and they're made in his image. So why wouldn't we continue to pray for them? And then instead of trying to rally people around our cause, what if we just prayed for people regardless of their cause? What if God moved in their life? I think that's way more valuable than anything else.
It's always easy to villainize people from a distance. It's so much harder face to face.
Absolutely.
Like, you're like, oh, wait. Like you're someone's son or daughter and went through real stuff and you just see things a little bit differently. And I think that's a helpful framework, specifically when you're going to start to see all the campaigning happen and all the narratives and all the like, you know, the you shouldn't vote for this, for that. It's like, man, like, how would Christ treat these people? Therefore, how should I? And then for me, as a young dad, some of my earliest memories around politics, I think I was in kindergarten and it was, there was like a revote or something and I barely remember the candidates, but I remember my classmates talking about what their parents said about a certain candidate. And so even from like age of 6, I had a sense of like, oh, my parents think about this issue like this. And so I'm also going like how I talk about the affairs of the government, how I talk about our president, how I talk about these things in front of my kid is a form of discipleship. And so it's also kind of like a word of like young children are always listening, watching, and we're forming how they think about some of this. Didn't you say like How old were you when you wanted to stay up for the?
Listen, y'all, I'm a little weird with this.
This is Lewis
all right?
Hoffpower to a T.
All right, so my whenever I was 6 years old, I was begging my mom to let me stay up past her bedtime so I could watch the presidential debate. Like this is a little weird, but man, I grew up in a home where people were very active in politics and people ran for office and were a part of that because like we do have an opportunity to influence our community and influence our country. This is the place that we live. And so I think it'd be a poor stewardship if we didn't engage in some type of way. Like we've got a voice, we've got a vote, we can be a part of it. But through it all, I mean, Paul wrote to the Romans in Rome under Caesar that they were to honor the emperor. Mm-hmm. All right. I'm glad we don't have an emperor. We just have a president or a governor. But that principle is still there. We need to make sure that our homes are a culture of honor. Yeah. Because culture is not a culture of honor right now. We're in a mocking culture that wants to ridicule people and policies. But man, what if as the people of God, we're going to be people of honor.
Set apart.
Yep.
Love it. I love it. Since we're telling secrets, I guess I'll
Yes.
share
Spill the beans.
mine.
Come on.
Well, for Halloween one year, when I was in elementary school, I was an American flag. So
I love that, Carissa.
just an American
Great. Is that
flag.
spooky?
Like as like a shirt. I'm trying to figure out like where was your head in the flag?
I was super patriotic. And
Okay.
I was just like so passionate about
Did you have like wings?
the
Like, when you,
government. Like my mom sewed me.
Lady Liberty?
She sewed me a
Hey, we got
dress.
Lady Liberty on season Ocho right
No,
here.
it was a straight up, like I wore an American flag.
Can we get
dress.
pictures in
Oh,
like
that's
the
great.
show
In the
notes?
show notes. No, but my first year that I was able to vote, I actually signed up to be a poll worker to work
Yeah.
at one of the precincts that you could vote at. And I was just like, gosh, I want to be so
believe it.
involved. This is my first year voting. I was so passionate and excited about it. And I thought I had I knew everything because that was my first year voting. I
Right.
was like all in, kind of outspoken and obnoxious, to be honest with you. And when I showed up to work the polls that night, at the end of the night, all I thought was just, there's so much I don't know.
yeah.
There's so much I don't know. Like, I don't know the half of what goes on in all of this. And man, I just think that was a healthy perspective for me to realize as someone who thought I was like so aware of everything that was going on, that there's just so much we don't know. There's so much more to the story than we see. And so I would just consider that thought as we go into the season, that there's probably a lot more to the story than we really realize.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I think a practical for all of our first-time voters and for all of us who haven't voted in 4 years, when you go to the ballot box, there's going to be more than just the presidents on your ballot. Like, I think sometimes we forget about this, that you're actually
Who are these
voting
people?
for local
I like their name.
judges. Like, there's like a lot that you're actually, like, your vote has a lot of power to. And I'm guilty of showing up and I'm like, I don't know what you stand for, but I guess I have to. But and I think if we're going to be transparent, I think we need to be good stewards of this time as well. Of like, we're not just showing up with one name, but we're actually looking at like, man, who are the judges that we're electing in Palm Beach County? Who are the city commissioners that we're actually putting into office? Who's going to be the new police chief? Like, when we actually look at that ballot, there's a lot that we don't know about, and it's actually a much bigger conversation than just the person we're putting in the White House. Like, it actually affects where we live in our county. I think we need to be good stewards of that as well. I think, Krista, you spoke to it so clearly. There's a lot that we don't know. And if we're ignorant, we're just going to show up like, all right, here we go. And then we're going to very quickly be surprised. And then there's going to be someone on TV that's like, I'm your mayor. And you're like, oh, hi. We should probably have looked into you a little bit. So I just think we need to take responsibility for the whole thing, not just one portion of it. Be a good steward of the whole process, not just one process, and actually care about all of it together.
Yeah, I think a narrative also when it comes down to voting that I've certainly thought, probably said out loud, that a lot of people say is like, oh, my vote doesn't matter. Especially if it's polarized, you're like, and really if you apply that thought process to yourself in that moment, how many other spaces of your life will you apply that subconsciously? You show up to work, someone asks your opinion, you show up to a faith community and subconsciously going like, oh, my voice doesn't matter. When it's like, God's given you a voice, like usually the devil wants to shut your mouth up. And so I think we're living in times where we do have a voice and it's a privilege, and there's some places that you don't. And so I think it's going, God, what do you want my voice to be used for? Like if I was the only person to say what you want or do what you want, how should I speak? How would you speak? You know? So I think that's important to think through. And the other thing, maybe let's talk about this for a couple minutes, is about this time every 4 years, Christians, non-Christians, everyone all of a sudden is super bold and evangelistic. So it's like, we got to go evangelize and tell people about Jesus. And it's like crickets sometimes. And it's like policies come around and you got people who are like, I'll rally and I'll stand with signs and I'll tell people. It's like, what if we had that same energy and confidence to tell people about Jesus?
Yep.
You like,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of boggling, but it's easier to ride under that guise of, I don't know, it's easier acceptable. I don't, why do we think that is?
Well, it's easier to win the House or the Senate than it is to win your neighbor. So it's a whole lot easier to hold up a sign and get a whole bunch of people with you, and this is our cause, and we're going to rally.
I'm not saying that that's like a bad thing. It's just like there's like movement, you know?
Right.
Like,
right. Well, whenever you actually have to talk to your neighbor, that risks relational equity. Now,
And-
this is the person that you live next to.
and time as well. Like I think
Right.
also it's really easy to go hold a sign. It's actually really hard to go serve that person that lives next
Oh
to you.
my gosh, yeah.
100%. Like I think like the weight of two, like they don't weigh the same. Like, oh, you want me to show up, hold a sign? Great. Wait, you want me to serve them even when they're on my lawn when they're not supposed to? You want me to speak words of life over them even when they knock my trash? Like I think if we can go through the list, like that's harder to do. It's a weightier weight that we have to carry. When you can hold a sign, but actually like Jesus says, no, like pray for your enemies, love those who persecute you. Like it's a mandate that's not just as easy as holding a sign.
And I think part of it is just temporal. Like if with a political policy, we could see it play out easily in our lifetimes. But whenever we talk about the kingdom of God and winning people for Christ and sharing our faith and serving people, that's playing a long game that we might never see the end of. We don't know what kind of seed we're going to sow. That we won't see the fruition of it, but somebody else will. And maybe in heaven we'll get to have this moment where, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that I chose to serve you. I didn't see it in my lifetime. I didn't see it while I was living at that address. But man, I'm grateful I was able to do it.
It's great.
Yeah. I mean, if Judgment Day was as real as Election Day
Oh,
in our
go
minds,
there.
then,
Say it
then we
again.
would have some
Say it again.
urgency around going,
Yeah.
gosh, my family members actually going to go to hell. You know, it's like, this is real. Like
Yep.
it's real. It's a long game though, right? We don't know the day, we don't know the hour, but there will come a day, and we know Election Day is coming, right? But so is
Judgment
Judgment Day.
There you go.
that's great. I just got this mental image of like, you know, the United States, it's like you got the blue, you got the red, but like what if it was, you actively saw on a map those who don't know Christ? Like would it fuel you more? Like would it, in this is pretty nerdy, but in X-Men, Charles Xavier like has this ability with like mutants to like put on this helmet and locate people with this mutant DNA all over the world at one time. Like he can see all of them at one time. And I just began to think like how the Lord has the ability to see all people at all places at all times. He knows the character, he knows their heart. And I'm like, man, like we have such a narrow view sometimes of life.
That's true.
Specifically in this season where it's like we're so polarized, and it's like, man, the election's going to end, and we're still going to be here, God willing,
And it's temporary.
yeah,
I also think too of like recognizing that like 4 years come and then another, wow, it's election season all over again, and another 4 years go. Like to think about all the election cycles that we've lived through, and it's like I don't think my life's changed that much. Like who's in office? My life actually kind of stayed the same because I'm not rooted to it. And I think, Tyler, what you're speaking to is eternal, not temporary. Chris, what you said too, like, man, if we would just focus on the eternal so much more than the temporary, like what would our world look like? And what if, like, man, all believers of Jesus, we would just be so focused on Judgment Day, just so focused on, man, like there's a day that Jesus is coming. And if we put the money, the effort, the passion into that, like what would our world look like? And I think it's radically different.
it's great. A couple weeks ago, pastors did a series called On the Table, really just talking around some subjects we don't get to, which is a great resource if you're listening. And I think I'm so grateful for our church being in this place to bring things we usually don't talk about bring them on the table and have conversations around that. So if you have a young college student or maybe a high school student that just graduated and they're entering into this phase where like now maybe they can vote for the first time, they don't know where to turn, maybe the family they grew up in thinks differently, what would be some advice or counsel you'd give to them?
Yeah. Well, I would just say don't listen to the loudest voice in your life. Just because they're loud doesn't mean they're right. So I would say just start there. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. We didn't have a biblical foundation for how we process and look through the lens of how we're going to vote. You know, we're not looking to the biblical concepts. We're just going, you know, I was listening to the loudest voice in my life. So I would just encourage you, get around some of the most godly people you know and ask them questions about things you don't understand. Just, what do you think about this? Can you help me understand how you would process this? Don't ask for just the answers. I don't think the best question to ask somebody is, who are you going to vote for? I'm going to vote for them too. You know, I think there are better questions to ask really godly people, like, why do you believe that? Or why do you think that? Or what makes you, what leads you to that conclusion around all the things, like Alec, you were talking about the other things on the ballot, right? There's more than just the bottom line. There's a couple other things that we ought to consider and look at. I know there's a million resources online, but I would just say, obviously, TikTok is not a great source for...
Wait, what?
I know. It's shocking to hear, but TikTok isn't the best news source.
Breaking news on Season 8.
TikTok is not the best source to find, you know, your feed is just feeding you whatever you want to hear. It's
exactly right.
What do we call it? An echo chamber, right?
Yep.
It's not giving you different perspectives or different ideas or helping you think beyond what you already think. It's just echoing what you already know or want to hear. So talk to people that are different from you. Talk to people who are more godly than you. And I think that's a good starting place.
Great. Anything else you guys want to add before we close it down, wrap it up?
Read this book. Like, and it's simplest though, like, this book should inform how you vote. This book should inform your opinions. This book should inform your values. This book should actually inform how you see the world and how you see people. Like when we think about scripture, like it actually does inform every part of our lives. And I know that was very brash, just read this book, but truly no, like if we're going to be more like Jesus, we need to go to the word, who is the word. The living, breathing breath of God is in this book. And I would just encourage those who maybe, you know, you're 20 years old, you don't know where to start, you don't know where to vote. Maybe you don't even know Jesus. This is the place that you need to be. Read this book, let it inform your life, let it contradict your life. I'm even like looking at the life of Jesus, like he offended people a lot. Like if you get offended, keep reading, ask why you're offended, ask for a better way to learn Jesus's way. So read this book.
Great.
There you go.
Great. I think it was Karl Barth, Swiss theologian, who said we got to preach with the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. And so we have these conversations because it matters what's happening in culture and in voting and all these things, but ultimately we're Jesus people, so we're going back to him. So Jesus in politics, you should vote for whoever you feel like the Lord has led you to vote for. Search the scriptures. It's not my job to tell you, not our job to tell you. But pray this is helpful. If you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, send it to somebody. If you have questions or want to talk, let us know. We'd love to continue the conversation. Other than that, we will see you next time on another episode. Peace.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Young and Adulting. Follow us on Instagram at cf.youngadults. And if there's a topic you'd like to talk about, we want to hear about it. Send us an email or leave a comment with your thoughts. We'll see you next time.